Picture this: the Galaxy phone in your hand, the Samsung TV in your living room, even the invisible memory chips buried inside your laptop. For 3 decades, Samsung Electronics has been everywhere, like the air we breathe. As the world's largest consumer electronics giant, its chip business has long dominated the industry's top spot, generating profits that even surpassed its smartphone division. But 2025 has brought unprecedented turbulence to this tech empire. In the first quarter of this year, Samsung, the undisputed king of the memory chip market for 32 years, was overtaken by its Korean rival SK Hynix, losing the DRAM crown. 36% versus 34%. The gap seems small, but it marks the first power shift since 1992. In the foundry business, Samsung's market share has plummeted to 7.7%, barely ahead of China's SK. That ambitious dream of challenging TSMC, now reduced to desperately clinging to second place. The numbers tell an even more shocking story. At the end of 2024, Samsung's market value evaporated by $122 billion in a single quarter. Then, entering 2025, the company made an even more stunning decision. It slashed its foundry division's investment budget by 50%, from 10 trillion Korean won down to 5 trillion. Although third-quarter operating profit rebounded to 12.1 trillion won, hitting a 3-year high, this growth came mainly from its smartphone and other businesses. The semiconductor division contributed only 6 trillion won in profit, still looking weak compared to SK Hynix's strong performance during the same period. Making matters worse, news broke in October that Samsung had once again cut its HBM production target from 200,000 units per month down to 170,000. How did a chip empire that once aimed to conquer both memory and foundry simultaneously fall into an all-around crisis in just 3 years of the AI era? The story begins in that year. Samsung Electronics unveiled a plan that shocked the entire industry. The company would invest 171 trillion Korean won, roughly $151 billion, with a goal to become the world's #1 in both memory chips and foundry services by. How audacious was this ambition? Imagine not just defending the gold mine in your backyard, but also going next door to steal your neighbor's business. Memory chips had always been Samsung's traditional strength. Since entering the game in the 1980s, it took less than a decade to reach the DRAM throne, where it sat for over 30 years. But Samsung wasn't satisfied. It had its eyes on a bigger prize: foundry services. The foundry business model is straightforward. You manufacture chips for others. Tech giants like Apple, Nvidia, and Qualcomm design their own chips, but don't own factories, so they need foundries to produce them. The industry leader is Taiwan's TSMC, commanding over 60% of the market with jaw-dropping profit margins. Samsung wanted a piece of that action. In 2022, Samsung played its first technical trump card. It became the world's first to mass-produce 3nm GAA technology. How advanced was this? Theoretically, it offered better power efficiency and stronger performance than TSMC's solution. And Samsung launched it a full year ahead of TSMC. In the technology-intensive world of chip manufacturing, being a year ahead means you can attract the world's top clients and lock in the most profitable orders. During that period, Samsung truly shined. Apple's iPhone chips, Qualcomm's flagship processors, Nvidia's graphics cards, they had all been produced in Samsung's factories at various points. Samsung reigned as the memory chip king while also holding the runner-up position in foundry, with market share once reaching 15%. Fighting on 2 fronts, everything seemed rock solid. But beneath the glow of technical leadership, a fatal crack was quietly widening. Those major clients who had once entrusted their orders to Samsung were beginning to slip away, one by one. Early 2023 brought the launch of Qualcomm's new flagship chip, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. This time, the foundry wasn't Samsung, it was TSMC. Behind this shift lay an embarrassing story that left Samsung's engineers collectively speechless. A year earlier, Qualcomm had handed the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 to Samsung's 4nm process. The results caught everyone off guard. Phones ran hot, becoming uncomfortable to touch after just 10 minutes of gaming. battery life took a massive hit. The root cause? Yield rates. While Samsung's advanced process looked impressive on paper, in actual production, the percentage of working chips per batch was far too low. Massive chip waste meant skyrocketing costs and unreliable quality. Qualcomm quickly rolled out the improved Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1, this time manufactured using TSMC's process. Something magical happened. Same design but lower heat, better performance, longer battery life. Market reputation flipped overnight. Since then, Qualcomm's flagship chips never returned to Samsung. Similar stories played out with other clients. Apple left even earlier. After 2015, iPhone's A-series chips went entirely to TSMC. NVIDIA used Samsung's 8nm process for one generation, then moved its next-gen AI accelerator chips completely to TSMC. AMD never even considered Samsung in the first place. The most ironic case came from Samsung itself. In 2024, Samsung planned to use its own 3nm process to produce the next-generation Exynos 25500 chip for the Galaxy S25 phones. But because yield rates were devastatingly low, reportedly only 20 to 30%, the plan was abandoned. If the company lacked confidence to mass-produce its own chips, imagine how outside clients felt. TSMC's numbers painted a stark contrast. Although their 3nm process launched a year behind Samsung's, yield rates remained stable above 80%. By the fourth quarter of 2024, the N3 process accounted for 26% of TSMC's total revenue, with Apple's iPhone 15 and 16 series as the main customers. One side had orders booked solid into next year. The other had factory equipment sitting idle. Making matters worse, Samsung had originally planned to build a massive factory in Texas, dedicated to producing 2nm chips. News emerged in early 2025 that the factory had postponed installing its most advanced EUV lithography machines. The reason was simple: not enough customer orders. Installing the machines would just leave them sitting idle. A company that wanted to challenge the industry leader now couldn't even dare to start production because of insufficient orders. That fact alone spoke volumes about the severity of the problem. By the first quarter of 2025, Samsung's foundry market share had dropped to 7.7%, down from 8.1% the previous quarter. TSMC's share stood at 67.6%, and it kept growing. Behind the client exodus lay more than just technical problems. The real killer was a fundamental trust crisis, one rooted in the very DNA of Samsung's business model. May 2025 brought explosive news from Korean media. Samsung was internally discussing whether to spin off its foundry business and list it as an independent company. Although the news was never confirmed, it exposed a vulnerability Samsung had always refused to acknowledge. Why can TSMC lock in top-tier clients like Apple, NVIDIA, and AMD? The core reason is simple. TSMC only does foundry work. It doesn't design chips. It doesn't make phones or computers. When clients hand over their blueprints to TSMC, they don't worry about tech leaks, because TSMC won't use that knowledge to become a competitor. This is the power of the pure-play foundry model. Samsung's situation is completely different. It does foundry work, designs its own Exynos chips, and manufactures Galaxy phones, tablets, and TVs. If you're Apple, would you hand over your latest iPhone chip designs to a company that also makes phones? If you're Qualcomm, would you let a company that also develops processors know your technical secrets? This isn't hypothetical. Industry insiders have stated plainly that clients don't trust Samsung's so-called firewalls. Although Samsung repeatedly promises that its foundry and design divisions are separated, such assurances aren't enough in the business world. Once trust breaks down, it can never be fully repaired. This structural flaw has been magnified to the extreme in the AI era. AI chips represent the most profitable, highest barrier products right now. NVIDIA's H100 and A100 AI accelerators sell for tens of thousands of dollars each, with stunning profit margins. Yet NVIDIA ultimately chose TSMC. The logic is straightforward. TSMC's interests align perfectly with NVIDIA's. The more NVIDIA sells, the more TSMC earns. Samsung's diversified portfolio, on the other hand, became the biggest concern. First quarter 2025 data proved even more brutal. Samsung's foundry business revenue hit $2.89 billion, down 11% quarter-over-quarter. During the same period, SMIC's market share climbed to 6%, just 1.7 percentage points behind Samsung. A company that once aimed to challenge TSMC now struggled to hold on to second place. That's when Samsung made its industry-shaking decision: slash the 2025 foundry investment budget by 50%, from 10 trillion Korean won down to 5 trillion. This amounted to waving the white flag, admitting defeat on this front. While the foundry business sank into quicksand, Samsung's crown jewel, its memory chip business, was experiencing an even more devastating crisis. The roots of this crisis trace back to a supposedly insignificant niche technology from a decade ago. Back in 2013, engineers at SK Hynix developed a new type of memory chip called HBM, high bandwidth memory. This chip stacks multiple DRAM layers vertically, like building floors in a skyscraper, achieving data transfer speeds several times faster than traditional memory. But the problem was clear: manufacturing difficulty was extremely high, costs were high, and market demand was virtually zero. Samsung's assessment at the time: niche product, not worth major investment. Their strategy focused on continuing to dominate the mass market: PC memory, phone storage, server DRAM. These were the high-volume, stable-profit mainstream products. Let SK Hynix, the perennial runner-up, mess around with those fringe technologies. 10 years later, that decision became Samsung's biggest regret. In 2023, ChatGPT sparked the AI revolution. Training large models demands massive computing power and massive data throughput. NVIDIA's AI accelerator, the H100, became the hottest piece of equipment on the planet, and the H100's critical component, HBM, SK Hynix stepped into the spotlight. A decade of accumulated technical expertise exploded in that moment. Their HBM3 and HBM3E products supplied NVIDIA directly, often as the exclusive or primary supplier. By the first quarter of 2025, SK Hynix controlled 70% of the global HBM market. Although HBM represents only a small fraction of total DRAM shipments, its unit price is sky high. A single HBM chip costs several times more than ordinary DRAM. This drove revenue and profit share through the roof. The numbers don't lie. In 2019, HBM accounted for just 3% of SK Hynix's total revenue. By 2025, that figure jumped to 42%. What was once a niche product had become the company's most profitable business. Samsung had HBM products too, but it started too late. By the time SK Hynix was already supplying NVIDIA with 5th-generation HBM3E, Samsung's HBM3E was still struggling to ramp up, plagued once again by yield issues. Reportedly, Samsung couldn't even pass NVIDIA's quality certification tests. It wasn't until September 2025 that Samsung's 12-layer HBM3E finally gained NVIDIA's approval, but by then the market had already been carved up by SK Hynix and Micron. SK Hynix held 70%, Micron nearly 20%, and Samsung couldn't even claim third place. The first quarter of 2025 brought a historic moment. SK Hynix captured 36% of DRAM market share, overtaking Samsung's 34% to become the world's largest DRAM supplier. This marked the first time since 1992 that Samsung had lost this throne. The comparison grew even more brutal. SK Hynix posted 7 trillion won in operating profit during the third quarter of 2024, an all-time record. Samsung's overall revenue looked decent enough, but during the toughest periods, its memory business actually posted losses. The greater irony: Samsung's former advantages, massive capacity, and comprehensive technology had become liabilities in the AI era. 80 to 90% of their chip production capacity was still churning out traditional DRAM and NAND flash, but these markets were seeing prices hammered down by Chinese manufacturers. Emerging forces like Yangtze Memory and Changxin Memory were stealing huge volumes of low-end and mid-range orders with cheaper pricing. Samsung finally recognized the severity of the problem. In 2025, they began emergency adjustments. Engineers were transferred from the foundry division to the HBM business. Parts of factory production lines were converted to HBM manufacturing, but the window of opportunity was closing fast. With both fronts collapsing simultaneously, what was once a chip empire now faced nothing but a desperate last stand. How much opportunity does Samsung have left? In 2025, Samsung finally faced reality and began strategic contraction. Foundry investments slashed in half. Engineers reassigned to HBM, the Texas factory, delaying equipment installation. Every move sent the same signal: we're gonna focus. But the market waits for no one. TSMC's 2025 capital expenditure exceeded $30 billion, continuing to expand 2nm and even more advanced processes. SK Hynix announced a 30% increase in equipment investment, from 22 trillion won up to 29 trillion won, all directed toward HBM and advanced manufacturing. Competitors were already planning their next moves while Samsung scrambled to adjust. Still, Samsung had some good news. In 2025, the company signed a long-term cooperation agreement with Tesla worth $270 billion to provide 2nm AI chips for Tesla. This represents one of the largest single orders in global semiconductor history. If Samsung can win this battle at the 2nm node, it might restore some confidence in the foundry arena. On the HBM front, Samsung decided to skip the HBM3E window entirely and go all in on developing the next generation HBM4. Their logic was straightforward. Since we already lost the 5th generation, let's bet on the 6th. Launch products before SK Hynix and turn the tables in one shot. But this strategy carries massive risk. News broke in February 2025 that Samsung's 1C DRAM process had been delayed until June due to yield issues directly impacting HBM4's mass production timeline. Then in October, Samsung cut its HBM production target again, from 200,000 units per month down to 170,000, because mass production supply to major clients like Nvidia had been pushed back. Third quarter earnings showed Samsung's operating profit hitting 12.1 trillion won, a 3-year high, but this growth came primarily from strong performance in smartphones and home appliances. The semiconductor division contributed only 6 trillion won in profit. Although HBM shipments were growing, the scale remained vastly behind SK Hynix. The window of opportunity keeps closing. Samsung's predicament is, at its core, the story of an industrial-age giant failing to pivot in the age of intelligence. That imperial dream of conquering both memory and foundry fronts simultaneously ultimately lost to 3 words: lack of focus. While SK Hynix went all in on HBM and TSMC zeroed in on pure-play foundry, Samsung tried to fight on every battlefield at once. It couldn't win clients' absolute trust like TSMC, nor could it achieve overwhelming technical dominance in critical areas like SK Hynix. The deeper lesson: technical leadership doesn't equal business success. Samsung beat TSMC to both GAA transistors and 3nm processes, but yield rates and trust are what clients truly care about. The rules of the AI era have changed. It's not about whose PowerPoint deck looks prettier, it's about who can actually produce chips reliably and consistently, and who clients feel safe in trusting with their core technologies. As 2025 draws to a close, Samsung's HBM shipments are finally growing. The Texas 2nm factory remains under construction. The partnership with Tesla brings fresh hope. This former chip empire is attempting to trade strategic contraction for survival space. But in this winner-takes-all AI era, the window for catching up may be shorter than Samsung imagines.